Julie, it's so great to have you on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Oh, man, I'm so excited about having this conversation. Not that I get excited necessarily about talking about people's pain journey, but I get excited about the fact that when we talk about something that, one, we haven't really talked about a whole lot on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. And in general, the church doesn't talk a whole lot about, and yet it feels like and seems like so many people are experiencing this type of season, this type of pain point. That's what excites me, because I feel like that we're going to be taking territory back from the enemy in this conversation, right? And
Yes.
And so we're gonna talk quite a bit about postpartum depression and your journey in that. And you've written this book that is really helping. I think it's going to help so many people. Hope Inside Out: Approaching Depression with Purposeful Hope. Even the language of that just speaks nothing is wasted culture like crazy. So before we dive into your story of this, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you guys are right now, what your family's like, where you live, what you do, and we'll dive back into this journey that you've been traveling for a little bit.
Absolutely. So I'm married, mom to two boys, and we live in Dallas, Texas, a suburb of Dallas, Texas. And I homeschooled my boys from the time they were little all the way up until this point. They're in school full time this year. So I have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they're both in school full time.
Wow.
Yeah. So I am officially done homeschooling.
Wow.
And I got to graduate. I got a PhD. It was right before all this started, locally from university here. And then the journey from there was the journey through depression that began. Wrote a book. It's called Hope Inside Out. That's also based on this story of postpartum depression in my life. And from there, God's just been opening up little avenues to bring the story out.
Wow.
For the sake of people that need to know that they're not alone.
Yeah.
So I am just so humbled and just blown away by what God has done with this little story about this little mom from a suburb in Dallas. Like,
wow.
You never expected that. I never expected that. So here we are.
Wow.
And
it's so important to talk about this because, you and I said this before we started recording, but the church publicly doesn't seem to be talking about this a whole lot. You don't hear very many sermons on postpartum depression. And yet,
no.
This has certainly touched our family. My wife has been open and honest about some of her journey over the past couple of years with some postpartum depression. It seems like every circle that she gets in, especially talking with moms, everybody can find solidarity in that. They're like, yeah, me too. I feel it. But because it doesn't seem like something that we're talking about a lot of people live in quiet desperation. They live in confusion.
Yeah.
Depression in and of itself is something that feels like it can sneak up on you. And then when you're in it, you're going, I don't know. I don't even know what this is, and I don't know how to get out of it. And I just know I don't feel normal. I don't feel like myself. So this is a really important conversation, and I'm glad that you're willing to share this with us. Why don't you dive back and take us kind of on the journey? Tell us a little bit about how this began, and we'll talk about how God met you in it.
Yep. Yeah. One of the most important things from what you were just saying is, for me, it didn't just stay at postpartum. It just kept extending, and the whole life of that length that I had to endure was almost 6 years. And so if it's not taken care of and not spoken of and not addressed when it's at that infant stage is when it keeps growing to where it went to in my life. And for me, I'll start with the beginning of this whole journey. I had a 2.5-year-old son. And then the younger one comes along and, hospital, had the baby, and I come home, and I did not come home feeling okay. I came home feeling very confused because what happened for me personally was I would see this vision in my head, and it was as real as our conversation right now happening in real time. In my head, I would be pacing up and down the postpartum hallway, looking for something, and I wasn't sure what. And I would pace till I came across an empty baby cart, and I would see that the baby was missing. And I would immediately feel like I lost my baby. And so I would look immediately to see if he's with me and pick him up and just mourn. Unrealistic,
Wow.
absolutely unrealistic, but it
Yeah.
was real time in my head while real life is happening
Yeah.
simultaneously. So I had two realities playing out at the same time. I wasn't sure what was going on, so I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my husband.
Hmm.
And then when, the weeks started to progress and I started to feel more and more confusion, when the nighttime would hit and, everything is quiet, this felt like, I'm pretty sure triggered by anxiety, would speed up really
Mm.
fast. And it was like, I couldn't I couldn't rein it in by any means. And what would happen is I would just sprint out the door. It was like me trying to get away from my head.
Mm.
And all I knew at that moment was to sprint out the door. And it would be middle of the night, 90% of the time, because it only kicked in at that time of the night where the speeding up happened. And so then my husband would have to pack in a newborn and pack in my toddler and come out looking for me, on the
Wow.
streets. And I could run. Like, I'm not a runner,
Yeah.
but that wanting to get away from what that was would just give me this
Wow.
unusual strength. And I would run barefoot. And then I
Wow.
would run till my energy caved. Like, I couldn't run
Yeah.
anymore, right? And I would
Yeah.
just crash. God kept me safe from anything happening during that time frame of the night. And I would always go find a source of light because my husband knows I hate pitch dark. I would always have a
Mm.
night light in our room. So I would go park myself, like, under a street light or some source of light and just stay there because I knew he would come.
Wow. So
And that's,
darkness seemed to be a little bit of a catalyst in some of this speeding up of this anxiety then for you. Okay.
yes,
Wow.
darkness. And I'll tell you later in the story is what darkness plays a big part in the story later
Okay.
too, where he would come find me. And that's where it was like, okay, this is not good. And I experienced a lot of rage, just not knowing what to do with myself. I would at certain points not know who my kids were, like stare at them blankly. And then when something dropped or something made a noise just to, you know, wake me up from where I was, I would realize who they were. It was just a lot of odd stuff like that. And so
Wow.
we sought treatment a little later, about the 5th month, 6th month mark. And that's when we were diagnosed with postpartum depression.
Mm.
We immediately sought prayer from our church. Our leadership just wrapped their arms around us and they led us to
Wow.
a counselor in our area. And she was also somebody that they knew. And she became an important part of my life. She became my safe place,
Mm.
to where I'm so glad I did that because I couldn't express what I was going through to my husband. He couldn't understand. He couldn't relate. And
Mm.
I can't blame him for that. I was mad at him at that time. But
Right.
when I look back, it's not something I can blame him for. It's not a language that he would
He
understand.
doesn't have a frame of reference for it. Right.
Mm-mm.
And that's what I feel
Yeah.
like there's a disconnect so often with husbands and wives in those seasons because,
Yes.
personally, we can talk about this a little bit later, but personally, we're like, I don't understand what this is at all. I don't
Yeah.
even, and so we don't know how to be there for our wife in that situation. So I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
And no, you're fine. Needless to say, it affects the marriage.
Right.
It affects our relationship. And it became hard for me to go out into public. Any public places. So here's where I'm talking about the darkness that plays in a different way.
Mm.
I became afraid of the light. That
Mm.
became my reality. So daylight, sunlight, being outside in the light, it became really scary to me. And we just happened at that point
Interesting.
to
Wow.
move into a new house. And so I chose all the window coverings for the house, and I chose everything in black and
Wow.
dark brown. And what I would do is, even that was too much for me. And so I would pin it to the wall so that, where there's a light that could creep in.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how much, like a little bit of light when it's daytime will creep into your house. I couldn't stand that. So if it's still there on my walls, you'll see marks of tacks and
Wow.
pins into the wall, like where I pinned it into the wall, because I was so terrified of daylight and light in general, being in
Wow.
public in general. I stayed in a dark room for a lot of the time because I also started to deal with physical challenges like fibromyalgia, neuropathy, stuff like that started to pop up. And so a lot of time was spent in darkness with every drape in the house closed to the max. And I couldn't go to church. I couldn't go to grocery stores. And here again, my husband would want me to go, and he would be like, people are going to ask me where you are. We hadn't started sharing our struggle with anybody in general besides our counselor and our pastor's family. So it became a challenge for him when he would show up with just my toddler and I was not there. And so he would say, "Can you come?" And sometimes he'd say, just come for a little bit. And I would feel pressured and go, and then I would end up hiding in the restroom stall. Or if it was a grocery store, I would run out because it was too much light, too much sound. My sensory, it was just a sensory overload for me. I would run to the car and just stay in the car till it was time to come home.
Wow.
So that became my reality for the longest time, and it kept everything dark. And that became our reality as a family.
Yeah.
And to the point where my husband was tired of trying to open the drapes because I would pin them back. And he just asked the Lord for a sign that I would open them up someday myself.
Man.
That would be a sign of at least my healing was beginning.
Right.
And that light would come in without him having to force it on me. So that became reality. Darkness became a companion. Hiding became a companion. From someone who was afraid of the dark to darkness becoming just somewhere I needed to be, and I felt safe there. Total false hiding place, a lie of a hiding place, but I hid there for the longest time.
That's so that's so interesting that it went from one extreme to the other. Do you have any kind of, as you look back on it, is there any kind of like explanation that comes to mind for that? Like here's maybe why. I mean, I know a lot of these things, they don't make a lot of sense, right? It's just so much more this just sense and feeling of anxiety, and you're trying to get away from whatever is bringing that on and toward the things that you feel like are safe. But just really interesting to me that it flipped over from darkness being the catalyst to your anxiety to light being the catalyst to your anxiety.
Yeah. I think for me personally, it was when I woke up during the day, I felt like I had to face another day. And I always woke up with this tight knot in my stomach and this tight feeling in my chest. It felt like there was a weight in my chest sometimes that made me feel like I couldn't breathe or catch a breath. And I didn't want to face another day of that. And it was just terrifying for me to face that reality of, the day has started. People are going to start calling or wanting to come. I didn't want to see anyone. I couldn't make eye contact with people. That became a very significantly noticeable factor in my life, to the point where when I started to get better, I went to tell our pastor. He always stayed up to date with us on our journey and always stayed with us and prayed with us. And so I went to tell him, I'm getting better. He said, I can tell from your eyes, because it shifted. Something shifted to the point where I was able to make eye contact with him again. I didn't realize it. He told me later, but I couldn't make eye contact. And that difficulty of making eye contact at church and public places is what led me to hide in restroom stalls, because I didn't want to make eye contact. I would hide in there till the noises thinned out in the church and I knew everybody was gone. And, that kind of, yeah.
Julie, this obviously, it almost feels like an understatement to say this got really bad for you. Can you explain to us how bad it got? Because I think a lot of times people, whether you have a friend or a family member who's dealing with this, or whether you're dealing with it yourself, you kind of, in some ways, wait for the bounce back moment, right? Where is it this going to hit the absolute bottom before it bounces back up and starts to get better? And in some ways we try to make that a little bit of a formula, right? Which none of this is formulaic. But I'm curious for in your journey, how bad did this get? And then where do you see the turning point started to take place?
Well, it got bad to the point where I wanted out, absolutely wanted out, and attempted a couple of times and was unsuccessful, thank God. And I always, always, always wonder why I was spared, because
Mm.
it still chokes me up when I think of, some that did leave and then I'm still here.
Yeah.
And so I just, nothing but gratefulness to the grace of God and the love of God in that area. Different plan, I guess, for my life was charted out, but I wanted out. I wanted
Yeah.
out. I physically attempted, and then I would ask God
Mm.
every single day, take me. Just my life is useless here.
Mm.
My kids are better off without me. My family's better off without me. I'm not contributing to family or society. It just started to, useless was the word that would just come up in front of me every single day,
Yeah.
to the point where my counselor would like make me like, what is the first question that comes up in your mind? And
Right.
what came up, when to my surprise, was, why am I so useless?
Mm.
And so when you feel like, one, all the pain and the agony and the trauma of what you're going through, and then you're thinking you're absolutely useless to family, to society.
Mm.
So I'm thinking all those is what caused me to want out. And, just there were days when that didn't work. I would just scream into a pillow, like push it up against my face and scream as loud as I could, because I tried to control the running away as much as possible, because I realized, and that was the point when this reel was in my head for the longest time, and that started to fade away a little bit.
Yeah.
But I would still scream into a pillow, go into the closet, scream into the carpet, so that my kids wouldn't hear, but I needed to let it out,
Mm.
to the point where I started to yell at God, and then
Mm.
feel guilty for it on the back end. And then I remember putting my kids to bed one day for a nap in the afternoon, and I pulled away from the bedroom and just walked into my living room and just shook my fist at heaven. And I swore to God that I would never raise my boys to know him or love him, or that became the extent of my rage.
Wow.
And so that's where it got to, running away and screaming and rage and
Yeah.
anger and not wanting to eat. I absolutely lost most of my appetite, I would
Mm.
say. Just lived on fluids for the longest time, was taking all this medication for, from seeing the doctors, and I lost a lot of weight.
Mm.
Just, yeah, all those things. And this is all happening at the same time. So,
Wow. Wow.
yeah.
Well, and this, had to have, I think you already alluded to it earlier, that it impacted your marriage and impacted the entire family.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly, how exactly did it impact, particularly your marriage, your relationship with your husband?
Well, it reached the point where my husband, like I said, he couldn't understand.
Yeah.
And so for him, it was leave her alone. And he was afraid to communicate, because most of the time it ended up where we would have an argument, because he wasn't understanding what I'm saying. My language was different from his. And this is not even just a regular marriage language. This is coming from a place of all this baggage of postpartum and all the
Yeah.
trauma. And so he couldn't understand. And so he would just not talk to me for most of the day. And that would affect me like he didn't care.
So it
He
further
always helped
isolated
with,
you, is what it, yeah.
yes. And he always cared for the kids and everything. And I never felt like I needed to tell him, hey, help me with the kids. He did that. It
Mm.
just was second nature to him. But when it came to me, I felt like this back walking away,
Mm.
that didn't want to talk or didn't want to address it. today, if I ever feel a sting, I mean, God is healed. And if I ever feel a sting from just life happening, I can tell him today,
Mm,
I'm not feeling good. I feel this anxiety or this pressure, and he'll pray or
yeah.
we can talk about it. And that is so much better today. But at that point, when I was alone, it affected us. It affected us to the
Mm,
point where I would throw things at him, and he walked away one time, and just multiple things that affected the marriage. And we attempted counseling, but the both of us were at a different point where that even the counseling didn't work because I'm still healing from this. It wasn't time for me to focus on the marriage.
mm,
It was just not possible.
right.
And he was still, I think, denying reality. And so he was this, like a shut door. He wouldn't open up. And so it became very hard to the point where we just gave up
Mm,
attempting to see the counselor. We just stopped doing that because I had to focus on healing myself.
mhm.
And so, I mean, God is faithful. It's at a very different place today, but
Yeah.
it was hard. It was
Yeah.
hard, not sure where we were going and what was going to happen and if it would last at all.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine that had to have been very difficult for you both.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as you look back on that, how you would, what would you say you wished, how do you wish that he would have responded? How do you wish that would have played out between the two of you in this season? What did you need? Because I think there are a lot of people who are listening to this. Maybe they're in the depths of that and they're searching for answers and they're going, maybe it's a husband who's saying, how do I be here for my wife during this? Maybe it's a wife saying, how do I communicate to him in a way that he maybe just might understand and be able to be what I need in this season? What would you say?
I would say for me, I just wanted him to listen.
Mm,
I wanted him to just tell me it was going to be okay. Something like that, where for him, it was just, I think, the anxiety and the fear of all that was just unraveling in front of him and in our lives with the little ones and everything was, as much as I didn't see it then, overwhelming for him as well. So he just
yeah,
shut down.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I wish he hadn't shut down. I wish he was more available to just talk or just listen and, let me vent maybe. I feel like sometimes the rage would have not been as bad if I had a place to go vent with him because I'm only seeing my counselor a couple of times a week. And she was a very safe place for me where I could text her any time of the day, night. She would call, she would pray. Um, she became a mother figure to me and to this day is, but I needed more because
Mm,
I'm only with her for a fraction of the time that in a whole week, right? And so I needed more. And she enabled me to the point where she said, find 5 people that you trust your heart with and tell 5 people about this so that
mm,
when you feel this way, if I'm not available, you have one more person to call, one more person to trust, 5 safe places.
yeah.
And so I'm glad she did that for me, but that's what I wanted, that safe place
Right.
with my husband. And I didn't have that at that point, and I don't think he was equipped at that point to give me that or provide me with that.
Yeah. Man. So, Julie, when did you see? What can you look back on in terms of? Are there places are there moments that you remember that God really met you during this? I mean, are there kind of moments that stand out where it obviously what I'm hearing from you is that there weren't a whole lot of people that were able to be a safe space for you outside of your counselor.
Mm-hmm.
Did God show up for you in those moments? I mean, we said a couple of ways. Sparing your life as you in those couple of times that you attempted to take it. I mean, obviously He showed up in those ways, but any other just really like emotional experiences that you had with the Lord that you can point back to?
Yeah, as I've been telling people, I grew up Christian, and so all my life, that's all I've known. And so besides God, and after I was done with all the venting and the running and everything, I just felt like I had no place to go to besides him.
Mm.
Excuse me. So I turned back to him, and I started to feel guilty at first for yelling at him and venting at him and everything. And then I decided, Lord, I need you. And when I started to go back to him, I kept feeling this strong impression in my heart to endure,
Mm.
endure. Because every day, every single day, I woke up asking the Lord, please, I want out of this. I want
Mm.
out, either home, take me home,
Right.
or heal me from this. Lift this pain off my chest and my head. And just kept begging him every day. When everything quieted down, it came down to me and him. It
Mm.
came down to just me and him. And I started to open up the scriptures because I was afraid to open the scriptures at first because I felt like, okay, you've been yelling at him, you've been venting at him, so you can't go to the Bible. So I was always in that place of condemnation with the Lord.
Mm.
But somehow, when that message to endure started to stick on my heart, I started to open up the scriptures and just search for me.
Yeah.
Search for somebody that was me, somebody that was upset, somebody that was able to be himself or herself with the Lord, somebody that didn't have to always sound like they were this perfect, prayerful, put together person. And I grew up in the church, and 99% of the time I heard about the people that had it all together.
Mm.
How victorious. And because he did this, how victorious. And a lot of the times I feel like we leave out the backstories of these people that got their victory.
Right. Right.
And so when I searched and searched and searched, the Psalms were like this light in front of my eyes,
Yeah.
like one step, it was like this dark tunnel, and I'm seeing light enough to lead me to the end of the tunnel
Right.
because I started to see people in the Psalms venting,
Yeah.
frustrated, angry. David, the other psalmists, all just saying the exact same things that I'm saying,
Yep.
putting words to my emotions. And the Lord put it in the holy book of
Yeah.
scriptures.
That's right.
He didn't hide it. And that was just an enlightening moment for me,
Right.
where I didn't feel guilty anymore because I could be myself before my God
Mm.
and see and watch what he was doing in the lives of these people. And I started to just dive into scripture, and I struggled with insomnia for the longest time. And scripture became my lifeline, where I would just leave it plugged in my ears
Mm.
so that the night was not occupied with darkness and torment and what is my mind going through. It literally came down to having to take those thoughts captive and replacing it. And because I couldn't do it, I wasn't at an emotionally strong place to
Right.
do that action of replacing my thoughts. I just put it into my ears, and that kept going into my head
Wow.
constantly. So that was one point where God started to lead me to open up myself into his word. And I would start writing all the
Mm.
venting I wanted to do. And I felt absolutely safe with him, to where he became my hiding place. And one of the chapters in my book is called Hiding Place. It
Wow.
went from darkness, hiding in that dark, dark place where I thought I was safe,
Yeah.
but it was not really a hiding place to me, wanting to hide in who he was. And one of the biggest, did you ask me where the shift started to
Yeah.
happen?
Where was a turning point or multiple turning points that you felt like, yeah, really shifted
Yes.
things?
And like I've told a lot of people, I feel like God didn't give me my instant that I wanted, my
Mm-hmm.
instant coffee. He gave it to me in the form of a pie chart. And,
Okay.
the prayers, the counseling, my counselor,
Yep.
the word of God, me being able to vent with my journal.
Yeah.
And I think the next part of that pie chart was, it was still going through this, my year 4 of the struggle.
Mm.
And I was at my church. It was a ladies' event, and it was a night of comedy. We had a famous comedian
Mm.
come, and it was just a fun night. Everything was about prizes and games and laughter. And I just sat in that crowd, just with people that I know in the church, because I've been in that church for the longest time since my son was born. So this is year 4. And I was sitting there feeling terrible, alone, lonely, and I'm going, I want to go home. I want to go home. I don't know anyone here. Nobody understands what I'm going through. I am just all alone. I am isolated. I'm a shame factor. All these feelings hit me at the same time, and I'm just thinking I want to run from here, but I couldn't run because I'm sitting in between friends. So if I run, they're going to wonder
Right.
why.
Right.
And so I made it through the night. It was an hour and a half. Made it through the night, got home, and once I put the kids to bed, I'm thinking, okay, I can sleep, but I couldn't. Again, it was the time of insomnia struggles.
Yeah.
And that whole night, this was my reality. That feeling that I had in the church sanctuary came home with me. And it just kept getting heavier and heavier and heavier through the course of the night. To the point where I'm going, asking the Lord, take this, please. I'm already struggling. Why am I feeling like all these extra additional emotions piled on top of me? And when day started to dawn, I don't know if I've never noticed it before, but that morning, as the day was dawning, light crept into the room through one of those gaps. It probably was there before. I never noticed it. I noticed it that morning. And as that light was creeping in, it was this strong impression on my heart that just said, like, everything that you experienced sitting in that room and this entire night that you went through, feeling all those emotions, I need you to know that you are not alone, that there were several others just like you sitting in that very same room that you were in. I need you to share your story now. And I'm not done. I'm still in the middle of it.
Yeah. How could I share if I'm not over on the other side? I haven't gained
And
victory
exactly,
yet, Wow.
exactly those words that you just said. I told God, I don't have a story of victory. I don't have a testimony that I've heard most of the time where God did this amazing thing and I'm healed and here I am and here are my 5 steps. And I said, I don't have that. What credibility do I have to share this story at this point? And he wouldn't let go. He wouldn't let go to the point where
Wow.
it was gentle. It was never that pressure or condemnation, but it's time. Do it
Wow.
now. Do it now. And my counselor was also pushing me along the same lines. And I was going through life coaching with her at that time, and she's also a life coach. And I was getting trained in life coaching and going through my healing at the same time. And so she started to compel me on her end, and as it was happening on two ends, to gently share my story. I started to do that. Small groups, little groups of ladies, close friends, coffee shop conversations. I started to open up my life to people.
Wow.
And what I heard 80 to 90% of the time in response was, oh my God, we had no idea that you were going through this. We are, or so is my family
Right.
member, or so is my child. You are not alone. You're not alone.
Wow.
And the biggest confirmation I got, because even at those points, I'm still doubting I'm not an authority on this. Should I be saying this? I should be careful. And a friend of mine that was going through her struggles with depression at the time was sat across from me at a coffee shop and said, I'm so glad you shared your story now, because if you had come to me with your story after your victory, I wouldn't be sitting across from you today.
Wow.
And so that was like the biggest confirmation for me, where God wanted me to share this story of weakness while I was still going through this. And I started to see a shift in my healing as I would meet with people, listen to their end of the stories as well.
Yeah.
And somehow all that scripture that was embedded in me from those past years would come up, and I would say something to them that I wouldn't say to myself. And I drive home or walk home and I'm go, oh, that's applicable to me.
Yeah.
And I would feel a sense of relief every time I met with one person, one at a time. My pie chart started to, fill up. And that was one of the biggest shifting points of my story, from where it went from darkness to light. And God started to push me to share my story during the thick of it.
Literally pushing you into the light to bring light to and expose what you're going through. Wow, that's amazing. I love that you said this as a pie chart, because I think that's really important. I think that lines up with my experience as well in terms of healing from a particular type of trauma, tragedy. I feel like it lines up with what I've heard so many other people say, that there's not one kind of magic quote unquote pill that takes you out of this, right?
No.
But it seems to resemble more like there's a combination of a lot of things that, like, when you put those things into the soil, right? When you kind of put those nutrients into the soil and then you let that over time begin to, turn I guess if we keep going with the metaphor, that turn the pH balance of the soil to something that's healthy, then fruit kind of comes out of that. But you can't just like drop one. It's not just one thing that typically turns things around for you. That's amazing.
It wasn't that way for me, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm finding too when it comes to, like, especially depression, because again, you often can't put your finger on, well, here's the one reason why I'm depressed, right? No. It's not, it's like a cocktail of reasons. It's a lot of things that have kind of led to that. And so it can't just be one thing that's going to bring you out of it either. Right.
No.
And, certainly undergirding all of that is the Lord's grace. But it's not just like, well, you got to pray more, that's it. You got to pray more. That's going to bring you out, or you're not close enough to God, and that's why you're depressed. Right? It's like, no. Are you kidding me? There's so much else that's going on.
Yeah.
Anything else that you would say in that, while we're on that topic, anything else that you would say in that pie chart that really helped, it helped you?
I think that God put his finger on one thing at a time. Just
that's good.
Me as a person, I don't think I could have dealt with if he had tried to deal with me venting and my hiding and coming out from the hiding into the light. And then when I started to share my story, that was dealing with the shame aspect of my story, because I was ashamed of who I was. And so he put his finger on the shame. And then, he started to show me a little later that this pain was worth enduring, because here I can use it for something. Wow. So I feel like he put his finger, even in my life, unforgiveness, wow. that can cause anxiety and stuff like that. And so he would put his finger on one little thing at a time. And I think I'm wired that way. I don't think I could have taken it all at a time. And wow. I think that's why the Inside Out worked so much for me. And that's why I titled it that way. It didn't come in from a healing and then everything else slowly healing inward. It worked its way out.
Wow.
And so he put his finger on one thing at a time that he knew that my little personality could deal with, because otherwise I probably would have exploded if he dealt with everything of, okay, don't hide in the light, bring the shame story out, everything at the same time.
Yep.
I think I would have been probably too overwhelmed to deal with it.
Yep.
Probably would have gone way backward a few steps. So he knew how I needed to heal. And I'm so, so grateful for that. That he works with each one of us. Our pie charts will all look different,
wow.
Because someone else would have a different tolerance level for God dealing with the shame. And, so I feel like he dealt with one thing at a time, sometimes some aspects of one along with the other, but there was time and there was grace, and he knew when and where and how it needed to be dealt with. And now that I'm seeing what it is doing for me and the story coming out and how different people are taking from different portions of that pie chart needed to happen.
Yes.
Because the whole thing won't work for everybody. So
right.
some glean from some aspects of it right. and some glean from other aspects of it.
So good.
And I'm so grateful that he did it that way for me.
Wow. Julie, that's huge what you're communicating right now, because I think we can talk about this pie chart, but you only know that it's a pie chart when you look back in retrospect.
Yeah. Yes.
You put all the pieces together, right? It's not while you're in the middle of the journey. In the middle of the journey, it's one step at a time.
Yes.
You're walking down
I didn't have a pie chart then.
Exactly.
No charts.
Exactly. You're walking down this really dark path, right? I mean, if we can think about it in terms of this kind of an image, it's a really dark path. You have no idea what's in front of you. You don't know how to get out of this thing. And yet God's word is a lamp to our feet, a light to our path, right? Which only shines one step, maybe two steps in front of us. And so the way that God will tend to walk us on our healing journey, no matter what the pain point is one step. And it's the step that we need, right? It may not be the same formulaic step as somebody else, but it's one step. It's the step that we need to address first. Yeah. And then we can go to the next step. But then as we look back on it, we go, oh, here's all these elements, right, that God used linearly, right, as he took me down that journey. Yes. So it starts out looking like a linear journey, and then you look back on it and it's this pie chart that becomes kind of the cocktail of your healing. And that's so important, because as people are listening to this conversation, one person's going to extrapolate one thing. They're going to go, oh, that's what I really got out of this conversation. Just as you said, another person's going to think of something so totally different. They're going to get something else, because the Holy Spirit is taking your experience, Julie, and he is, he's extracting one principle from that for one person and one for the other person. And that's so important to remember, because we can't just dive into all of this. And like, our mindset is like, okay, we're going to fix this. We're going to do all these things. And it just can be so overwhelming to try to attempt that.
It is. Yes, it is. And a friend of mine was once reading my book, and she had to, at chapter 2, I think she had to put it down. She wasn't ready for the rest of the chapters. Wow. And like you said, that's how every different person's healing is, from a different perspective or vantage point. So I feel like, when she said she had to put it down, I was afraid I hurt her at that time. I was like, God, I hope there was nothing in there that hurt her. But she wasn't ready for chapter 3, So what she needed was whatever the first 2 chapters had. And so I'm not specifically talking about the book, but, the aspects of healing.
For sure.
And
wow. Well, I think that's what that's what can make depression in general so confusing, because we are whole people. So we have different dimensions of our life. We have a physical dimension. We have a spiritual dimension. We have an emotional dimension. We have an intellectual dimension. We have all these different dimensions of our life. In fact, most people say there's 8 different dimensions in our life. And so to be able to say which dimension is off right now that's causing this thing to go haywire and out of balance, they bleed into each other so much. Postpartum depression, it seems like, it can be hard to parse out, where is this just like early parenthood exhaustion? And where is this actually depression, like long-standing depression, because they tend to overlap in a lot of ways. So if you're trying to help somebody kind of parse that out, if you're sitting down and you're counseling someone and saying, here's the signs that you need to look for to indicate, hey, this may be a much deeper issue than just the common, we're not getting a whole lot of sleep and we're really exhausted.
Yeah. Well, for me, it helped that I had the reel in my head, where there was a distinctive mark of where that reel started to fade away, because that kept going for almost 1.5 years in my head.
Wow.
To where it just kept playing. And it would be me feeling like I wanted to pull my hair out and just get this out of my head. So that intense experience of a ride, where I knew it was still in postpartum.
You could tell that was much more than just exhaustion. There was something that was deeper than it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I felt like I was dealing with the child and my toddler and everything else. I think I was doing okay in those areas. For me, the bigger challenge was, what is this in my head? So that started to fade without me realizing. And it was my counselor that had to point it out, to the point where she noticed it was not just postpartum anymore. I wouldn't have, because I wasn't in a place where I could look at it with a clear vision, because I'm so muddled from all this. My vision, my head, my heart, everything is just muddled from everything. So I wouldn't have noticed it. So it would really, really help if you have a counselor or a safe place that notices it. Because I don't think the person that's going through the season is equipped to find out or realize, oh, I'm, taking this step from here into this season. Right. I wouldn't have realized it. I wouldn't have known. My counselor did, and she was able to see that this was becoming chronic and almost to the point of PTSD.
Yeah.
So she was able to notice that distinction. So it really would help to have a safe place, somebody that would notice it, if it's a friend, if it's a family member, a counselor, somebody that would see that or help you see that. So that's where those safe places that she had me put in, 5 people, her, it helped.
So she was helping you identify safe places. She was saying, okay, can you find some safe places that you can really pour this
Yes.
stuff out to. That's good.
Yes. And I needed it. Oh, I know I so needed it. So just those safe places would be able to help you draw that distinction line between postpartum shifting into something more serious.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. That's a really important thing to note, that, you know, what PTSD essentially is your body reacting to what should be, your external circumstances should be safe, but your body's telling you that you're not safe. And so you're in this heightened sense of anxiety, this constant hum of not feeling safe, of being on edge. And that can vary to different degrees. But it's so important for us to have those safe places. I mean, just for our soul, right? Just for our soul to feel like it can let down, and it can be in this place of peace and shalom. It's like it helps to recalibrate our heart, our mind, our spirit. And I think that's a really, I don't want the listener to miss that's even a very practical thing that your counselor was saying. Hey, I want you to identify who are those safe spaces? What are those safe spaces, right? Like, even if it's a location, like where can you go and sit and feel the presence of God, right? And feel safe. Who can you go and talk to that has demonstrated that they are safe? That's so important. I think that's a really, really good, helpful piece of advice in terms of, you know, beginning to catalyze healing or managing depression, or, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah.
Julie, what do you think? You know, you were part of this church for such a long time, and I'm sure you've thought about what can the church do, the body of Christ do, to better support moms who are experiencing postpartum depression, families who are in that postpartum season, you know, in general?
I think talking about it more, for sure. My church they were gracious enough to, like, when they were aware of my story the whole time, our leadership was, and they were walking it with us a lot of the time. So when I started to come out and share my story, they created a platform for me, created a women's night, very much like the one that I came to the realization that I needed to start sharing my story at this point of weakness. Wow. Very similar night, women's night, and they enabled me to share my story from the very pulpit where I felt where the laughter was coming, and I felt nothing but pain. And I was able to go express that from that pulpit, and they were gracious to give voice to what I was going through. And I think the church needs to continue to do that. Wow. Because there's so many. It's not just me. There's so many. Wow. And at that point, when I was sitting in that room, and that feeling could not be more real. Like I said, it's real time feeling, like this conversation between us was, I'm alone. I'm the only one. I'm the only one. You're the only one. You're all alone. That just kept pounding my ears and my chest. And I had to go through that night for me to realize, when I shared my story, listen to all these people coming up to you, all these emails you're getting, all these responses. This is where you need to realize you are not alone. Where within the church, a lot of our people are still hiding. Good people that love the Lord, but people that know nothing but the Lord. Like, I was a person that didn't know anything but the Lord. And like, I always use the scripture where Peter, you know, when Jesus asked the disciples, are you guys going to leave me too? And Peter said, Lord, where will I go?
Where we go?
You are it. Like, you are it for me.
You have the words of life. Wow.
You have the words of life. And so that was my anchor, where I have no place else to go. Yeah. You are it. There's so many that love God, and they're sitting within our churches doing the best they can to live this out along with life, because life doesn't go away. Yeah. This is only part of that life. Like, even life is a pie chart. This is just part of that. And then you're having to navigate through everything else, you know, your family, your financial stuff, your kids, your parents, your everything else doesn't go away. And then you have to manage this through all that. Right. So for people that love the Lord, our church needs to become, all our churches need to become a safe place where this is talked about, where this is addressed, and that shame factor needs to be lifted. I've physically experienced that shame so many times, where if there was an altar call, like go up, go for prayer.
Right. Right.
I would be in the last seat all those 4 years, last row, last seat,
Yeah.
corner seat. And I would have this go up for prayer, just go, and I would be, no, I'm not going. And when that push and that tug from the Lord was there, I would end up going. And that walk from the last seat to the front was some of the most difficult steps I've taken, because it felt like I was the shame object walking down that aisle, and that people were staring at me. Nobody's staring at me. Everybody is opening up their hearts to the Lord. It's a time of prayer.
Right.
It was a very hard walk for me to take from that back seat to the front. That needs to go away.
Wow.
That needs to go away.
Such a good word. Wow, man. Julie, this is such an important conversation, and I'm so glad that you're having this conversation. I'm so glad that you're stepping into this light. What a powerful moment where the Lord showed you that early that morning as dawn was breaking, that He wanted you to step into the light, and now you are, and you're helping so many others step into the light as well. I know people who are listening to this, that's going to be shifting for them. Just listening to this conversation and hearing your testimony. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm really grateful for that. I want to make sure that everybody picks up a copy of Hope Inside Out, Approaching Depression with Purposeful Hope. Doesn't matter if you're just experiencing or have a loved one who experienced postpartum depression, any depression in general, any season of this kind of chronic depression, this is going to be really helpful for you to pick up as a resource. Julie, is there anything else that you'd want to share with us that's just burning on your heart before we sign off on this conversation? Anything that you would share with someone who's going through this right now?
What is happening to me right now? Share your story. Share your story. As simple as that. There's a task in front of us. Because I've been through the 6 years and I've felt that healing. Like I said, everything else doesn't go away. Our life doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It still keeps happening. And ever so often I'll feel that sting of, anxiety or something. And I'm going, am I going into it again? Am I going to go back?
Right.
That fear is there. But I feel like the more I do this, the more I talk, and God is so faithful in the way He opens up these little opportunities for me to speak. And I'm so blessed by people like you. What you're doing is enabling this story. And then through my story, someone else will come behind me, and I'm the enabler for their story to come out. And there's this domino effect, so where the shame can fall and the hiding can fall and the darkness can fall. Talk, share, start with a safe place, keep going from there. When the Lord asked me to write this book again, I doubted my credibility. I'm like, I'm not a source of, I don't have a degree in counseling. And all He kept telling me was, go to your journal, take it out from there. And that's all I did.
Wow.
There's no 5 steps. I pulled everything from my journal, everything that I shared with you today. A lot of it is just put down in words. And so there's so many avenues. There's blogs you can start. There's podcasts you can do. We're not lacking in avenues to share today. We're not. There are people like me that are scared to, that are afraid to. I'm not good at social media and I'm not good at just going and putting myself out there. So God has to push me in little ways like this, little invites from godly people like you, and I wouldn't do it otherwise. So He knows each one of us. If you can open up, if you can share. Yeah. It's a task. Each step is a step of hope for someone else too.
That's great. Great. That's awesome. Well, Julie, we're proud of you. Keep going, keep sharing. This is bringing so many people into healing light. So thank you so much for what you're doing, and thank you for spending time with us today. This has been wonderful.
This was a blessing for me, truly. Thank you so much.
Hey friend, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stay in the loop every time Nothing is Wasted releases a piece of content here on this YouTube channel.